I would argue, and I'll just throw my hat in the ring on this, there's only ever been one person, and it's not Margaret Thatcher, who seriously defined conservatism, and it's Disraeli. Disraeli, who is the real founder of the party, the man who turns us into a mass party, the man who, by the Second Reform Act in 1867, recognizes, as is now the case, that the right is naturally supported by a very large part of the working class. And what Disraeli does, he elaborates very subtly, very cleverly, in a speech given in Edinburgh in the latter part of 1867, when the great debate over the Reform Act was over. It had actually gone through Parliament. Remember, can you imagine, I'm using a microphone in this comparatively tiny room. I could actually, if I strain my voice, fill it, because I'm a good actor. But can you imagine filling the Free Trade Hall without amplification? Disraeli and those great 19th century politicians did it. In the case of Disraeli, I've had a couple of glasses of red wine. He had 2 bottles of brandy per speech. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm so eloquent is the red wine is really quite good and the glasses were brim full, so the throat is well lubricated. But Disraeli's formula is really good. It's as follows. Listen very carefully, because this is the real text of what I want to say now. And this is the real text we should have as a party. In a progressive country, change is inevitable. And if you look in the dictionaries of quotations, that's where they stop. So you have Disraeli, the greatest conservative leader, saying change is inevitable. In other words, you turn him into a Tory wet. You turn him into a direct anticipation of, Fatty Soames, now rather Thinny Soames, of David Cameron, of all the rest of them. But Disraeli isn't that. The quotation then continues. I'll begin at the beginning again. In a progressive country, change is inevitable. The question is, what kind of change? Will it be change in accordance with the history, the traditions, the feelings of the nation? Or will it be change in accordance with the abstract principles of international liberalism? And that is the catch. Change, as Disraeli brought about in 1867, when he recognized that if you broadened the franchise, you wouldn't destroy the political system, you would strengthen it. Because one of the remarkable things about our political system is, unlike that of anywhere else in Europe, that notion, remember, which goes back to Magna Carta, just to the aftermath. I just signed a copy, so clearly it's gone through somewhere. Going back to Magna Carta in 1215, 1216, from that point onwards, there is this key notion of what made, remember, the great achievement of England is we invent self-government. It's our political history. So much about English history matters, but the fundamental thing is you invent self-government. You invent responsible government. The idea that the governors answer to the governed, that the laws are yours because you participate in the making of them through Parliament in which everybody is represented. And that's the foundation. That idea should be the central principle, the idea of the nation, of self-government, of everybody participating in it. And of course, that idea proves flexible. You'd had an aristocratic constitution. It's broadened by 1832 to include the educated middle classes. It's broadened by 1867 to include my grandparents. In other words, the skilled working class. It's broadened at the end of the First World War, ladies, to include you. The most conflict, the idea that women could actually participate, and should, because remember what's striking is, we all are told about the radicalism of the suffragettes. Yes, their methods were radical, but what were they wanting? They weren't wanting to tear down the Constitution. They weren't wanting to demolish Parliament. They wanted a place in it. And I don't know whether you've wandered around in this wonderful bit of London. This is a particularly hideous building, by the way, that is a monument to the horrors of rebuilding of the 1960s. But if you turn left as you go out here and go into St. James's Square, if you go up straight on this side, you'll come to the headquarters now of another club, I think it's the Cavalry and Guards, which is in the house that Nancy Astor, the first female MP, had. And if you look at that, you see suffragettes were not a movement of the poor. It's one of the grandest and most elegant houses in London. It's the access of women fully into the governing class. So that's what Disraeli was saying, that anything that develops that is native to England. Anything that doesn't is a catastrophe. Let's just quickly now summarize where Thatcher gives us the example and then look at the particular nature, the particular horror of the mess that we find ourselves in now. The position is quite clear. From 1945 to 1979, we were effectively ruled by the wartime coalition, by a Conservative Labour coalition. In other words, that when Churchill comes to power in 1951, old, tired, disease-ridden, drunk, let's be absolutely honest on all of these things, he does nothing. He knew he should have begun to reverse. Remember, the catastrophe of British history is what the Attlee government did. It creates an unfunded NHS and an unfunded welfare system on the back of the broken, bankrupt wartime economy. It is demented. Nothing ever gets right from that point onwards. It's fundamentally irredeemable. What do we do? Nothing. We nowadays talk about the Uni Party. They then talked about Butskellism. They talked about Hugh Gateskill, Labour leader, Winchester, Winchester College, and they talked about Rab Butler, who I think was Eton, but I can't remember who was a Conservative. It's called Butskellism. And both parties believed in Keynesian economics, nationalisation, prices and incomes policies, government 5-year plans, the whole. We were practically indistinguishable from the Soviet Union until the crash of that was we again had a moment with Barber in 1972-73 when we had something very much like Liz Truss. Because what the Chancellor of the Exchequer does at that point, the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, is to engineer a boom, as Liz Truss tried to do, to escape from the economic straitjacket. And I don't know how many of you were buying property at that time. I was. Property prices in London in 1972-73. Can anybody give me a quick guess as how much? No, they increased 3 times. They tripled. They tripled 3 times. That's the result of conservative economics. Right? And that's why you had Thatcher. That's why you had Thatcher. Why you have this notion, we've got to break. We've got to do something different. But ladies and gentlemen, I think with all Thatcher's greatness, and I do not deny it, I really do not deny it, she led conservatism down the blind alley. We became a party just of free market economics, and we're not. Conservatism has got to be about belonging, it's got to be about place, it's got to be about history, it's got to be about values. Yes, a properly run state is part of that. Yes, properly run public finance is part of that, but it's not all of it. And we lost sight of that bigger picture. And the result was, ladies and gentlemen, the cruelest thing of all, that Thatcher's victory was actually the moment of her defeat. Because in 1997, when Tony Blair was elected, and you may remember Somebody else, person of deeply dubious morals, you were saying I'm the rudest man, which is the greatest offence against English niceness. But the person, of course, in the politics of that period, who suddenly surfaced again, is dear old P.T. Mandelson. I know Peter quite well, I hate to say. The last time I saw him was the day before he flew to America to become ambassador, and I met him, at which point people go, well, don't tell where you met him. But I met him perfectly respectably in the Burlington Arcade, probably the most expensive shopping district in London, practically bent to his knees with the weight of the expensive shopping bags. But anyway, you may remember, P.T. said he was perfectly happy with people being filthy rich, providing they paid their taxes. And the thing that stopped us realizing quite what happened in 1997 was the fact that Labour at that point more or less kept the Thatcherite view of economics going. But what happened at the same time, and I'm now deliberately choosing what will seem extravagant language, but I actually believe it. What happened in 1997 was a constitutional revolution, a slow burn constitutional revolution, which in scale and effect and in consequences is of the same as the French Revolution that was carried out in England, in Britain, and it has the same values, those same values of ruthless international liberalism, glued onto this great historic constitution with catastrophic consequences. And I can summarize very quickly, and I will do so because I've been on my feet quite a long time, and you will want, I'm sure, to come back at me. The fundamental principle was enunciated by Charlie Faulkner, the first Lord Chancellor of the new dispensation, in 2003. And he actually says it quite explicitly. You'll remember I said the fundamental principle of our Constitution, we call it the sovereignty of Parliament. It's the idea that the people make the laws through their own assembly, through Parliament, with the MPs being finally answerable to the people. And what Faulkner says in that speech is, perhaps this is not such a good idea, and that much of public decision-making should be away from the popular arena, and it should go in different directions. Now, what on earth leads you to say that? It is the desire, well, to be French, to be European, to follow in exactly the same direction as the states of Europe, which, remember, led by Germany and the constitution we gave Germany after 1945, fundamentally distrust the people because the people were blamed for electing the Nazis. So what we've got to realize, there are two completely different views of democracy. There is the European, the German view, that liberal democracy is about limiting the power of the majority to protect minorities, whereas Anglo-Saxon just still is the idea that democracy is, well, the rule of the majority. It's why you've had to invent the word populist. That's why which means exactly the same. One is Greek and the other is Latin.